All right, here we go. Welcome into the Stone Shield Show. Once again, I am your host, Stone Shields. Happy Friday to everybody out there. We're about to finish our first week here at the Stone Shield Show. Got things started on Monday. Here we are 5 days later on Friday, and certainly excited that we got through the first week here and just onward and upward from here. Certainly appreciate everybody hanging out with us in the comment section. Got about 10 people here as we start today's show, but plenty on tap as far as discussion goes for today's show. Lots of exciting football last night, and obviously lots of exciting football on the horizon for this weekend as well. Of course, we're going to spend some time talking about the Cincinnati Bengals here on today's show, so make sure you stick around for that. And of course, we will have videos going up over the weekend as well on the channel as it relates to the Cincinnati Bengals, and a watch along on game day. Reed Mouse, Craig Sandlin, they will have you covered during the game and after the game with a post-game show as well. So make sure you guys hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. YouTube.com/ChatterboxSports. We are working our way towards 19,000 subscribers here at the channel. If you're a Bengals fan, certainly hit that sub button. But even if you're not a Cincinnati fan, we're trying to expand our coverage a little bit here at the channel. We're discussing more national storylines on my show. So plenty of exciting things in the sports world to talk about here at Chatterbox Sports. So obviously, if you're a Cincinnatian, hit that sub button if you haven't done so already. But also, if you're not and maybe don't have interest in the Cincinnati Bengals, Cincinnati Reds, what have you, we still have coverage for other sports here at the channel as well. So help us out. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that thumbs up icon as well. Certainly helps us out on our end as we look to continue to build our channel. But here's what's on tap for today's show. We're going to break down 10 players to watch in the Bengals game on Sunday between the Bengals and the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think that's always a good kind of preview video to do. We'll do that throughout the season as well. So breaking down 10 players, 5 on each side, 5 for Jacksonville and 5 for Cincinnati on today's show. And that video will obviously be live here on the show, but then that will go out over the weekend. So if you ever miss parts of our live show, that's totally all right. I understand you have jobs out there in the real world as you are, 11 to noon on weekdays. Certainly probably busy with whatever you're doing, but we will have podcasts that go up every single day right after the show. So if you missed the show live, that's totally fine. The podcast will be up for you. And then we also will have videos go out on YouTube, different segments that we do here on the show that will go out sporadically throughout the remainder of the day and also into the weekend as well. And we're working on getting some clips out there on social media. We have a Twitter page. We will start to kind of push that as well to you guys as well. But Chatterbox Sports, their Twitter page, of course, does a great job of clipping up some of our stuff and getting that out there as well. So 10 players, we're going to be breaking that down here on today's show. Also, a pretty exciting football game last night on Thursday Night Football between the Packers and the Washington Commanders. Going to be breaking that down, my instant reaction to that. Boy, the Packers looked really, really good last night, and I might be at a spot where I'm willing to say they're the best team in the National Football League. Also, a pretty exciting slate as it relates to college football this weekend. Not a ton of bangers, but we do have some top 25 matchups. Game day, of course, is Tennessee and Georgia. Going to be previewing that on today's show. Really exciting SEC matchup. Georgia, of course, has had Tennessee's number as they've beaten them 8 consecutive times, I believe, but that should be a really good football game, kind of a defensive football game, low-scoring football game is what I anticipate. We'll preview that on today's show. Also, a little bit of AFC North whip around. You see the fine folks over at The Athletic do that. Paul Dehner Jr., of course, covers the Bengals for The Athletic, does a tremendous job. He gets with the other beat writers in the AFC North, and they kind of provide some takeaways here going into week 2. So we will be discussing that. And closing out today's show, we have our best bets of the weekend. Told you guys this was going to be coming, and we're going to do this every Friday. We'll see exactly what it morphs into, but for now, I just have 6 selections, 4 college games, 2 pro games. We'll track them throughout the entirety of the season. And, obviously, if you guys want to ride with them, absolutely do that. And if we struggle, feel free to rip me in the comments section. But week 1 of doing this, and we'll see exactly where we take it throughout the rest of the year. But have 6 bets that we'll get to at the end of today's show. Well, let's start with the Cincinnati Bengals, as we typically do here at the show. And I want to break down 10 players that I have a close eye on in this football game for Cincinnati. And the first one that comes to mind for me is Shamar Stewart, right? His journey here, getting here to Cincinnati, has been up and down, right? I think, when he was drafted, there was some, animosity or maybe frustration from the fan base that, there was lots of safer picks picks at that point in the draft, right? Malachi Starks, a safety that was available. Baltimore obviously ends up taking him. Maybe some, interior players, an offensive lineman perhaps is what a lot of people that follow the Cincinnati Bengals wanted. But no, the Bengals decided to take an edge rusher with incredibly high upside, but didn't have much production. Obviously, it's been well documented, only 4.5 sacks during his time at Texas A&M. So I think there was some frustration initially with the pick, and then people maybe started to open up their minds a little bit more, get a little bit excited, understand the raw talent that he had, especially when you hear Zach Taylor, Al Golden, Duke Tobin, even Joe Burrow talk about him and kind of starting to get on board with it. And then, of course, you had the contract saga, right? Unable to, reach terms on the contract that he wanted with the Cincinnati Bengals, when he was getting, the guaranteed money, the language in his contract, the voids in his contract. That was drama throughout really much of the offseason after he got drafted. And I think the animosity towards Shamar Stewart then ramped back up, right? Everyone's like, oh, he's sitting here bad-mouthing the organization, hasn't played a single down, seems a little bit entitled, what have you. Remember he said something along the lines of, the organization is more concerned about winning arguments than winning football games. And as, a 21, 22-year-old kid saying that after not playing a single down for the Cincinnati Bengals, I think a lot of people took that the wrong way. I certainly did myself. And then the contract gets done, and then everyone kind of comes around again saying, oh, Shamar Stewart, he's here. We're finally going to be able to see him on the football field. And then he was out there, and you saw him really be a menace out there on the field as a rookie. Saw it in spurts throughout the preseason, and I think you saw it in flashes as well in week 1. So it feels like only a matter of time before he really bursts on the scene, kind of makes a name for himself, and has a really big game where he has a couple of sacks. So he's the player that I've got circled here, because if you can come up with somebody that can be a game wrecker and a pass rusher to pair with Trey Anderson, something Cincinnati has desperately been looking for years, Shamar Stewart can be that guy. He flashed against Cleveland. Maybe week 2 is his chance to really break out and get the quarterback Trevor Lawrence on the ground and really start to make a name for himself. I'm going to be watching the Bengals first-round rookie closely in this game. And speaking of Trevor Lawrence, he's the next guy that I've got on this list. Trevor Lawrence, his journey in the NFL has certainly been very interesting. He was one of those guys where, he was a sophomore in college, maybe even a freshman in college, wins the national championship, of course, over Alabama as a freshman, and people looked at him basically saying, yeah, he's going to be the number 1 overall pick when he comes out. Obviously, after 3 years at Clemson, that's what happened, and, he earned the contract that he got. He's, one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the National Football League, but I don't know if he's necessarily lived up to that hype whatsoever, right? I think he's been a solid NFL quarterback for you, but this was a can't-miss prospect. This was one of the best prospects since, Peyton Manning or John Elway, right? People really hyped Trevor Lawrence, and I was on that hype train too, I'll be completely honest with you. But he's kind of, faltered a little bit. Does have the playoff win a couple of years ago, that dramatic comeback against the Chargers, but, he's had some injury issues, inability to stay healthy, and really hasn't necessarily always put his team in the best chance to win. He's had some really bad turnovers, some poor decisions, things that you would like to see him not do at this point in his career. But I still am a believer in Trevor Lawrence, and I still think he can play really, really well against a Bengals defense that, sure, they played well last week, but they have been poor over the past couple of years. This could also be an opportunity for Trevor Lawrence to have a big game, and he's got to be somebody that finds this list as far as you're talking about 10 players to watch. Obviously, we'll have a close eye on Trevor Lawrence. We'll see which version of Trevor Lawrence shows out, or if it's a guy that's, a little bit reckless with the football and perhaps, putting the ball in danger and turning the ball over to Cincinnati. Number 3 here on this list, I have Amarius Mims, right tackle, of course, for the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll be interested to see what kind of matchup he gets, right, whether it's Josh Hines-Allen, out there, or Trayvon Walker, right? The Jaguars do have 2 really good pass rushers. And we're probably going to be saying that every week, right? We talk about Cleveland and all the issues that they were able to cause, but that's going to be something that Cincinnati has to deal with on a week-in and week-out basis. He did pop up on the injury report with an ankle. He's been limited throughout the week. He's going to play on Sunday, but interested to see how he moves around, how he protects. I think he had a really phenomenal rookie year. Thought he did some good things against Cleveland there as well. He's your guy for the future, right? I've said it before on the show. When Orlando Brown Jr. is no longer here, I think their plan is probably to swing Amarius Mims over to that left side and be the left tackle. He's banged up, but the Bengals need him to protect well in this game. He's on this list. Also, Foyesade Oluokun, linebacker for the Jacksonville Jaguars. We spent some time talking about him on yesterday's show. I think one of the most underrated linebackers in football, is always going to be a double-digit tackle type guy week in and week out. He forced a couple of turnovers that first game against Carolina. Bengals got to be careful with him, especially if you're Chase Brown, running up the middle. Foyesade Alukin's a guy that'll punch that ball out and, allow his team to hop on it and create turnovers. So he's also pretty good in coverage. He's a great tackler, doesn't miss many tackles. He's going to be a really important piece in this game for Jacksonville, especially if they're going to win. Bengals need to have a plan exactly for how they're going to attack the middle of the field. Got to be careful doing that against Foyesade Alukin. Another offensive lineman here on this list for the Cincinnati Bengals is Dalton Risner. Risner, of course, going to get the start at that right guard spot. Lucas Patrick is out. He's on the IR. He has the calf injury, and the Bengals will look to Dalton Risner. Allowed one pressure in the game against Cleveland last week. Again, kind of got called into duty, right? He was just kind of signed off the street, so to speak, a couple of days before the game. Next thing you know, he's in there. He's in the action. He's in the trenches trying to protect Joe Burrow. It'll be interesting to see how he performs after a week of preparation, understanding that he is going to be the starter. But Jacksonville, their front really is good. Joe Burrow talked about in his press conference, Arik Armstead, another guy that they have in the interior. He can create some issues. That's going to be a matchup that Cincinnati needs to win or at least survive between Armstead and Dalton Risner. And Cincinnati obviously looks to hopefully run the football throughout a consistent portion of the game, because the run game looked great in the first half against Cleveland, and then it was non-existent in the second half. They're looking for a little bit more consistency, and Dalton Risner's got to be up to the challenge if they're going to play well and have some success running the football, and of course protecting Joe Burrow. Travis Hunter is next up here on this list for the Jacksonville Jaguars side. He was a can't-miss prospect, right? The Jaguars, of course, traded up to draft Travis Hunter. We talked about earlier in the week how he's mainly just on offense. Week 1 against Carolina, Liam Cohen says he's going to play more defensive snaps in week 2. And really, your focus when it comes to Travis Hunter is this. At some point, he is going to have that breakout game where he does some crazy stuff, whether it's, he's got a couple of interceptions or a couple of touchdowns or is just flying around the field making all kinds of plays. That's going to happen in a matter of weeks. And if you're Cincinnati, your goal is to make sure that doesn't happen here in week 2. If you remember last year, right, that Monday night game earlier in the season against the Commanders, that was Jaden Daniels' coming out party, right? That was early in the year. People obviously, there was hype around Jaden Daniels, but they didn't really know exactly what he could be. Well, he burst on the scene against you in your stadium in primetime in front of the whole country and played an unbelievable game. Joe Burrow was unbelievable in that game as well. You could argue that Jaden Daniels was just a tick better, and it allowed Washington to win the game. You don't want a similar situation where Travis Hunter has one of those types of games. Obviously, he's not a quarterback, but again, has the ability to really burst on the scene and win a game for a team. That's going to happen for Jacksonville at some point. That's just the type of caliber of player that Travis Hunter is. Your goal if you're Cincinnati is to make sure that doesn't happen in this game. If he's out there defensively, it'll be interesting to see who he is matched up with, whether it be Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, whether he's in the slot against a guy like Yoshi or what have you. But Travis Hunter, obviously there's going to be a lot of hype around him coming into this game, and really interested to see how he plays and what the Bengals' plan for him is in this game as well. Jamar Chase, next guy on this list. Jamar against Cleveland, he's had throughout his career some games where he just doesn't do much against Cleveland. Got to kind of tip your hat to the Browns, kind of a reoccurring theme in a lot of ways, right? Particularly earlier in the season on the road in Cleveland, something we've discussed at length here on the show, but Bengals got to get him the football. Right? I don't care if you're handing it off to him. I don't care if it's a screen pass. I don't care if it's a little button hook on a short route. I don't care if it's an option route. I don't care if you're chucking it deep down the field. He has to touch the ball more than they did against Cleveland. And there were elements to last season where we would have a couple of these games early, and Zach Taylor would basically be we got to find a way to get him the ball. I get it, right? Defenses, their number one plan coming into a game against the Bengals is how can we slow down number one? How can we avoid number one killing us in this game? So that makes things a little bit difficult for Cincinnati. But the caliber of player that Jamar Chase is, he has to touch the football on a consistent basis throughout the game. If he does that, Cincinnati is going to be in position to win a lot of football games. He's the best wide receiver in the National Football League. I think that argument has kind of been put to rest, but the Bengals, Zach Taylor, Joe Burrow have to get him the football, and he's going to have some matchups in this game that he certainly can win, right? The cornerbacks of the Jaguars aren't necessarily the strong suit of their football team. There's going to be safety help over the top with Ja'Marr, but get him the ball in space and amazing things can happen. We all know that. Ja'Marr Chase certainly a guy on this list, and he's got to touch the ball more than he did in week 1. Travis Etienne, running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Bengals had a lot of success in the Cleveland game, slowing down the run, stopping the run. That was against Dylan Sampson. A little bit different here with Travis Etienne. Maybe his career hasn't exactly panned out how people thought, but Jaguars make an aggressive move. They get rid of Tank Bigsby, right? They're kind of rolling the dice with Travis Etienne saying, we believe in you. You were a top pick for us a couple of years ago. You flashed before in the past. You're going to be our guy. You're going to be our workhorse. I think fantasy owners around there that maybe got him a little bit later than he went in previous years got to be a little bit happy about that. Also, they have the rookie Bashal Tutin, who clearly they have belief in if they're going to move Tank Bigsby. But Travis Etienne's going to get a lot of touches in this game, and I'm really interested to see how the Bengals' run defense looks in week 2. I think we're at the point in the year where it's like there's not really trends, right? You really can't say this is a theme. We just have one game to go off of against a mediocre at best opponent, and the Bengals' run defense looked really, really good. Is the Jaguars' run offense really, really good? No, right? Are they a step above Cleveland? Yes. So if the Bengals can kind of match that a little bit and still play solid in this game against the run, that will be really interesting. Make Trevor Lawrence beat you with his arm. See if you can't take Travis Etienne away in this game. But Etienne's a really versatile back. He can run it in between the tackles. And probably even more importantly than that, he is a threat out of the backfield to catch the football. And there's going to be lots of opportunities in this game. If they're dumping it down to Travis Etienne, the Bengals are going to have to make one-on-one tackles in space. They did that against Cleveland. We'll see if they can do that again here in week 2 against Travis Etienne. 2 more players here on this list. Jordan Battle next up for Cincinnati at that safety spot. Really happy with what you got from Battle. Speaking of open field tackles, he was there to make them against Cleveland. Had the unbelievable interception off the deflection against Joe Flacco in that football game as well. And Battle was a guy where the Bengals rolled the dice on him, right? I think a lot of people were saying, we don't feel good about the safeties. Why aren't you drafting a safety? Why aren't you signing a safety in free agency? After all these cuts right before the season, why aren't you signing a safety off the street? The Bengals sat there and said, we believe in Jordan Battle. Preseason was ugly for Jordan Battle. There was, reports in camp that he wasn't necessarily having the best camp as well. Week 1, when it really, really mattered, he did a tremendous job. Is that a fluke performance for Jordan Battle, or is that something that he can do consistently throughout the entirety of an NFL football season? Because if Battle plays the way that he did in Week 1, regardless of how Geno Stone, his partner there at that safety position, plays, your safety play is going to be a lot better. Really impressed with Jordan Battle. Question for him, was it kind of a fluky performance, or can he carry that over into this game against the Jacksonville Jaguars? He's not going to get an interception in every single game. I'm not going to evaluate him based on that. I'm going to evaluate him on making sure receivers don't get over the top of that defense, and when he's in this position to make a one-on-one tackle, he makes it. That's what he did against Week 1. We'll see if he can carry that over in this game. Last up here is Jourdan Lewis, nickel for the Jacksonville Jaguars. We talked about him earlier in the week. Again, kind of alluded to, Dallas let him go. Big head scratcher for me. He was a really important part to that defense. Jaguars aren't paying him a ton, but he's out there for Jacksonville. He's a nickel. He lines up in the slot, but will they move him at all? Outside is something I'm interested to see. He's really good against the run as well. I expect him to kind of run up and make some tackles on Chase Brown in the run game. But the matchup with who he exactly is guarding will be interesting. The Bengals, of course, moved Ja'Marr all over the field. He can line up in the slot. Will they be matched up there? Yoshi, obviously your third receiver, your slot guy, he didn't get a single target in that game. Again, you didn't really complete a lot of passes in the game, so that's understandable, I guess. But that matchup there with Jourdan Lewis will certainly be interesting. He had a turnover and recovered a fumble, I believe, in that Carolina game there as well. He's a really good player, one of the leaders on that defense, a veteran guy despite it being his first year in Jacksonville, and that's going to be a tremendous challenge for Cincinnati in this football game as well. So there you have it. That's kind of 10 players that I've got an eye on here in this game. I think it's going to be close. as far as a prediction, I think Cincinnati wins, moves to 2-0, but I don't think this is a situation where they blow Jacksonville out at home. I think it's kind of a back and forth type game. I think the defense maybe regresses a little bit based on what you saw in Week 1 against Cleveland. I think Jacksonville is able to score some points with Trevor Lawrence at the helm, but I do think Cincinnati wins. Don't feel comfortable with that 3.5. That isn't going to be on one of our best bets later in the show, but I do think Cincinnati ends up winning this football game in Week 2. All right, got about a good chunk of people in here hanging out with us. Appreciate everyone getting involved here in the comments section. Off the bench, obviously, is not on today. We weren't on at 10 o'clock, but they will be back on Monday. I'll be producing Off the Bench, Trace Fowler, Reed Mouse. Looking forward to week number 2 of Off the Bench, and then my show will follow Monday through Friday as well here at the channel. All right, game last night was the Washington Commanders and the Green Bay Packers, and we talked about it on yesterday's show. It was exciting to get that caliber of a game on Thursday night, right? Two teams that I view as Super Bowl contenders, right, in the Green Bay Packers and the Washington Commanders. Washington obviously made it to the NFC Championship last year with a rookie quarterback, was kind of that darling of the NFL, right, that surprise team. And they made a lot of changes, particularly on the defensive side of the football, as they really were not a good defense, particularly against the run, which we'll get into last year, and still were able to get to the conference championship game. But I felt pretty good about Green Bay going into that game and winning. There were a couple of question marks that I had really along the offensive line, right? Zach Tom, their right tackle, one of the best tackles in the National Football League. He just got a big payday like a week or two ago, and then he had that oblique injury in Week 1 for Green Bay against Detroit, so they had to go to a second-round rookie, Anthony Belton, out of NC State, that got the start there at right tackle. And, Washington, do they have the same pass rush as Green Bay? No, we'll get to that side in a second. But there's always some question marks when you have to throw a rookie out there and you're not exactly expecting to have to do that. I thought Belton hung in there. He did enough. He was good enough, and ultimately allowed Green Bay to move the football and obviously win that game pretty handily. They won 27-18. It didn't really feel like it was that close. Also, they had another guard that was a backup that was starting in the game for Matt LaFleur. So the injuries, we talked about it actually going into the game. There were several guys that were nicked up, and there were several more guys that ended up getting hurt in that football game. But early on, Packers were seeing a lot of soft coverage from the Commanders, right? The Commanders were kind of just trying to keep everything in front of them, make Jordan Love, kind of keep it short with some of his throws, and he just was kind of licking his chops, and it was kind of, okay, yep, there's 8 yards right there, okay, yep, there's 10 yards right there. They really were picking on Marshawn Lattimore, which is very interesting. Lattimore, of course, was acquired at the trade deadline last year by Commanders in that trade with New Orleans, and he was really good in Week 1 this year for the Commanders, of course, against the New York Giants, but he was getting picked on throughout the entirety of this football game. He's a guy that's had a lot of injuries of recent and, starting to get up there a little bit in age. But for right now, that's looking like a tremendous trade for New Orleans and not necessarily a great move for the Washington Commanders, as Jordan Love was picking on him consistently. But they were really airing it out with Jordan Love, and I absolutely love watching him play. I'm in a position where I feel like I'm ready to call Green Bay the best team in the National Football League. My Super Bowl prediction going into the season was Cincinnati and Green Bay. Obviously, I'm not going to pivot off that here at this point right now, but the way the ball comes out of Jordan Love's hands, it really is tremendous, and he clearly learned a lot from Aaron Rodgers. Sitting those 3 years, you really don't see that in the NFL anymore, but Green Bay still knows how to understand what they do with quarterback. Just Favre to Rodgers to Love, that trio of guys is just unbelievable. And then you look at a team like Cleveland, who's had a million different quarterbacks, and lots of other teams have had a bunch of quarterbacks as well. Nobody handles the quarterbacks as well as Green Bay does as an organization. The cadence of Jordan Love is something that I was impressed with as well. Clearly learned from Aaron Rodgers, right? There were a couple of times where he was able to get Washington to jump, or at least almost get Washington to jump in that football game. And what Matt LaFleur wants to do is run the football between the tackles with Josh Jacobs and then open up the play-action game And they certainly were able to do that. And they also were able to take shots down the field as they really were airing it out and pushing the ball down the football field. That's what makes this Green Bay team and this offense and Jordan Love so fun to watch, is they are constantly, they want to run the ball. That's very clear. They want to run the football. Make no mistake about it. This isn't just some air raid offense from Matt LaFleur. They want to run the ball, but they also want to push it down the football field. And Jordan Love certainly is aggressive and wants to push the ball down the football field as well. And he did a tremendous job in that football game. And it really felt like the Packers were dominating the game for much of it. And then you look up at the scoreboard and, they're not ahead as much as they should have been. And Matt LaFleur kind of alluded to that at halftime as well. And, it was kind of interesting that there were some missed kicks in that game, right? The Commanders missed 2, Green Bay missed 1. And then you're in a spot later in the game where Jaden Daniels is finally able to orchestrate a drive. He gets down, scores a touchdown, and it's a one-score game. And I think this really can show what type of championship medal a team has or does not have. And Green Bay clearly has it, right? If you're a team that, isn't necessarily a serious Super Bowl contender, I think in that spot you can tense up a little bit when it becomes a one-score game. You've been dominating the whole game. Again, you should have had a bigger lead in which you had. And then it becomes a one-score game. You can get conservative as a play caller, and you can get a little bit tense as an offense. You didn't see that at all from Green Bay. Matt LaFleur still had some wrinkles deep in his bag. He had the run with Savion Williams, the draft pick rookie out of TCU. That was impressive. So he still had a bunch of different things that he could do with his offense, and they went right down the field and scored. And there was only about a couple of seconds there where it felt like the Commanders had a chance. Jordan Love gets the ball back, LaFleur's back calling plays, and they go right down the field and they score. And really impressed with that Green Bay offense. Jaden Reed broke his collarbone early in that game. What a tough guy he is. He had a foot fracture going into the game. He actually was playing through that, and they actually scored it. It would have been a touchdown on the Jaden Reed injury. It was a beautiful ball from Jordan Love and a beautiful catch with good coverage from Washington, and then he just clearly landed on that collarbone, and you knew it was going to be a very significant injury for him, and ultimately he ends up breaking his collarbone. He's going to be out for quite some time, but it's going to be interesting to see how they replace him, and you kind of saw it in the game, right? The other wide receivers did a great job of stepping up. Malik Heath, right? He was a guy that's an undrafted guy for the Green Bay Packers, has made the team for a couple of consecutive years now, a special teams guy for them. He gets called upon, only had the one catch, but arguably the best catch, definitely the best catch you saw of that game, down the sideline, initially ruled incomplete. He was able to tap both feet out of bounds. It's an undrafted guy, right? You don't always see that, from guys that aren't highly touted picks that can go in and really do a nice job as a receiver in a football game. So Green Bay very much has that next man up mentality. LaFleur's talked about it at length. He doesn't necessarily know who their best wide receiver is, right? I would argue it's Jaden Reed, but now he's hurt, right? You have the rookie Matthew Golden, who, by the way, they won that game, won it handedly, had a ton of yards on offense. Golden did not have a single catch in that football game. They were trying to get it to him, had a couple of deep shots down the football field, just not quite able to connect with Jordan Love. But Matthew Golden's going to be a really good player in this league. Maybe he could turn into that wide receiver one for the Green Bay Packers. He has tremendous speed. Just a track star is Matthew Golden. It'll be interesting to see what he can do going forward in Matt LaFleur's offense. Also, Romeo Doubs, right? Dontavian Wicks. Neither one of those guys super high draft picks, but they just seemingly have gotten better each and every year. Green Bay just drafts and develops. That's exactly what they do. You look all across their offense, it's a lot of homegrown talent, and they found themselves in a spot, and we'll get to the defense here in a second, where they're like, we have all this homegrown talent around us. We've drafted and developed so well. We feel like we are a contender. Let's make that move that could possibly make us a true Super Bowl threat. And obviously they do that with Micah Parsons as we transition this conversation a little bit to the defensive side of the football. And as impressive as the Green Bay offense was, I think the defense was even more impressive. This is a Commanders team with Cliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator, Jaden Daniels, the quarterback. They've had a ton of success offensively. You saw it last year. Didn't score a ton of points against New York, right? But they're going to be fine. They're going to be a perennial offense in the National Football League, and they're going to score a lot of points. They couldn't do much at all against this Green Bay Packer team. The Packers were playing a lot of zone coverage, keeping everything in front of them, and they weren't necessarily bringing blitzes They were bringing 4 guys, and they were getting home, right? I think Washington clearly wanted to establish the run early in the ball game. They were unable to run the football against Green Bay. You saw a couple of 3-and-outs kind of to start for the Commanders in that game, and then they really started to have to try to throw the football, but Daniels didn't have much time out there, and the pocket collapsed around him, right? Jaden Daniels, part of what makes him so good is his ability to get outside, escape, and get down the football field. Well, he only rushed for 17 yards in the game because the pocket would collapse, and there was just nowhere for him to go. And he had to get the ball out of his hand quickly, and Green Bay did a tremendous job of keeping everything in front of them and kind of going from there. And look, Jeff Hafley, he's unbelievable. Now goes into year 2 as the defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. Only a matter of time before he's a head coach. Of course, was the head coach at Boston College. Leaves, takes the defensive coordinator spot for Matt LaFleur. He's tremendous. He was tremendous in this game, and he has that new, shiny toy, right, with Micah Parsons, who, people talk about it a lot. They really were kind of talking about it at length on the broadcast, but it's just unbelievable the impact that he has, right? Even if he isn't getting sacks or tackles for a loss, he constantly is a problem and constantly somebody the offense has to worry about. There was a holding penalty or 2 on Micah Parsons, like hands to the face, where you just kind of panic and, you try to grab him, right? Because he's so good and he's so fast and he's so powerful. Also, a false start against him. Laramie Tunsil, right? He's trying to get back into pass pro as quickly as he can before the snap of the football, just because he knows he has to be one-on-one with Micah Parsons. And even as a guy that's been a left tackle in this league for a really long time and is a tremendous football player, he's not comfortable going up one-on-one against Micah Parsons. And we talked about earlier how one of the storylines going into this game was the rookie at right tackle for Green Bay in replace of Zach Tom. Well, really the tackle battle, or the tackle position that should be getting a lot of discussion here, was the right tackle spot for the Washington Commanders and Josh Connerly, right? First-round pick out of Oregon, I believe 29th overall. And, lots of people view him as a guy that's going to be really, really good. But he kind of ran into a buzzsaw here, his second game in the National Football League. If you're drafted in the first round, you're an offensive lineman, you're going to start. That's just kind of the reality of the situation. And it was kind of like, oh, here's Rashawn Gary and Micah Parsons and Lucas Van Ness. Good luck. And clearly he was not ready for that task. He got beat several times, and that in large part is what, made Jaden Daniels, under siege throughout the entirety of that game and really have a difficult time pushing the ball down the football field. But that defense for Green Bay is a serious, serious issue. The fact that they were able to hold on to Lucas Van Ness in the trade with Dallas for Micah Parsons is unbelievable. Mind you, this is a guy that was drafted in the first round a couple of years ago out of Iowa. Had he necessarily lived up to that draft selection his first couple of years in the NFL? No, but you pair him with Micah Parsons now, and he's the backup to Micah Parsons. You got Rashawn Gary, Micah Parsons, and Lucas Van Ness. That is a tremendous, tremendous challenge if you're an opposing offensive line as far as trying to protect the quarterback. Lucas Van Ness made his presence felt in that game as well. 3 unbelievable pass rushers for Green Bay, obviously headlined by Micah Parsons. And understand that as the season goes on, Micah Parsons' utilization and how he's deployed is just going to continue to increase, right? I mean, he wasn't out there for a ton of snaps again. Obviously less than half in the first game against the Detroit Lions. And, Micah Parsons is a guy they're going to move around, right? It was, he was out there for obviously all the 3rd and 4th downs, but if he's starting to be out there more on 2nd down and 1st down, it's really going to be an issue for the opposing teams. And you can tell that Micah Parsons starting to feel a little bit more comfortable. You can tell that he understands, oh, I'm on a really good team, right? This isn't the Dallas Cowboys. This is the team that is truly a world championship contender. He's fired up about it, and they're playing really, really well defensively. I just spent time there talking about the front, but it's all levels of this defense that are incredible for the Green Bay Packers. Their linebacker duo might be the best linebacker duo in the National Football League, Quay Walker and Etienne Cooper. The way they play together, Herbie was alluding to this on the broadcast, as a linebacker duo, yeah, you can both be really good, but you also have to understand how to play together, right? And that was when Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt in 2021, the year they went to the Super Bowl, they were doing that, but then as time went on, they just couldn't really, play well off one another. Etienne Cooper and Quay Walker are fantastic. Etienne Cooper going into year 2, he has taken a significant leap from where he was as a rookie out of Texas A&M. Quay Walker, of course, out of Georgia. He's been at it for a little bit now. Captain on the team, captain on the defense. He is a tremendous player. And then another Georgia guy that I'm surprised doesn't get more recognition, Javon Bullard, their nickel, is absolutely shut down. He was incredibly sticky in coverage in the game last night against the Commanders, clamping people up, making tackles. He, of course, also a Georgia Bulldog, and he was the defensive player of the game in that second national championship, I believe, that they won against TCU. So he's a really, really good player, and they can cover as well. That was impressive to watch. I mean, the guy Keyshawn Nixon, right, who's been with Green Bay for a couple of years now, was with Oakland prior to that. So he's kind of one of their veterans on defense, as they've got a lot of youth there on that defense. And now Rashawn Gary, who's always been a solid player, former first-round pick, as he's a veteran now out of Michigan. But you pair him now with Micah Parsons and Lucas Van Ness. Just a tremendous challenge for opposing offenses. Jeff Hafley, has lots of toys to play with defensively, and they're just going to keep getting better and better and better. And I'm in a position right now where I can confidently say, and we'll see what Philadelphia does against Kansas City. Maybe they blow them out, and that's a big win for Philadelphia. But right now, it certainly feels like Green Bay clearly the best team in the National Football League. All right, so let's talk a little bit about college football now as we transition our conversation here on today's show. Got some good games this week, and we don't have, it's not a loaded schedule by any means, but college football, especially this day and age with the transfer portal and conference realignment, you're going to get good games every single week, and that's something that really excites me. Big college football guy myself, and the biggest game this week is Tennessee and Georgia. And a little spoiler alert, we will pick this game at the end of today's show, but do want to spend a couple of minutes previewing it here right now. It was a game that opened at 7.5 in favor of Georgia, and I saw that, and I was like, what in the world? That seems a little aggressive. And now it's kind of come back down to life a little bit. It is now -3.5 in favor of Georgia. I think this is probably needs to be right around there, -3, -3.5 as far as the spread in this football game. And, both teams obviously undefeated, both teams 2-0. They haven't really been challenged yet whatsoever. Now, Tennessee has clearly been the better team through 2 games. They played Syracuse, and East Tennessee State beat Syracuse 45-26, and then East Tennessee State 72-17. So Joey Aguilar, who comes over from UCLA, that kind of was an interesting thing this offseason, right? All the drama around Nico Iamaleava, true freshman starter for Tennessee last year. He had whatever, his people said he didn't like kind of the offense that Heupel was running. It was a lot of weird stuff transpiring there. And at the end of the day, basically UCLA and Tennessee flipped quarterbacks, and it looks like that is a massive win for Tennessee because Joey Aguilar has been really, really good in these 2 games. But now he faces Kirby Smart, so we'll see exactly what Aguilar is made of. In this football game, Georgia also 2-0, 45-7 win against Marshall, and then only beat Austin Peay 28-6 in that football game last week. Now, that was there's been some weather around really the entirety of the country, so there's been some stoppages. We saw it in the NFL game, the first NFL game of the season between Dallas and Philadelphia. So there was a stoppage in that game. You're playing an FCS opponent. That's kind of, weird, right? So I don't know if necessarily it was as bad as that score perhaps would indicate, but Georgia obviously has dominated Tennessee. Kirby Smart is 4-0 against Josh Heupel, and he's won those games by a total of 80 points. Georgia's outscored Tennessee by a total of 80 points in those 4 games, and Georgia also has beat Tennessee 8 times in a row. Now, that's kind of where Tennessee was at as it related to Alabama as well. And obviously, they have turned that around. Alabama absolutely owned Tennessee for the longest time. And even, with Nick Saban still there, Tennessee was able to beat Alabama. I actually was at that game. Incredible environment in Neyland Stadium. They went nuts, and that was the day, obviously, the goalposts were put in the river for Tennessee. But so it's only a matter of time before Tennessee kind of gets that monkey off their back again and beats Georgia, right? The thing with Alabama, when you have those streaks, like, they end at some point, right? Like the Penn State, Ohio State, at some point Penn State's going to be able to get it done. It's not going to be this year, I can tell you that. But at some point, you would think Penn State's going to be able to get over the hump and beat Ohio State. Same kind of thing here with Tennessee and Georgia. But Let's talk about Gunnar Stockton a little bit here. Carson Beck obviously leaves for the Georgia Bulldogs. He transfers to Miami, and he was a highly touted guy. He sat for a couple of years behind Stetson Bennett. He was there for a long time. I think in a lot of ways he got a little bit too much criticism for how things transpired for Georgia over the past couple of years. Georgia led the country in drops, right, last year, so his receivers certainly weren't helping him out. Say what you want about Carson Beck. I'm certainly not a Carson Beck fan, but I think as far as the stuff on the football field, what transpired, some of the criticism was a little extreme as it related to Carson Beck, but he obviously got hurt in the SEC title game against Texas last year, had the elbow injury, and then the kid, Gunnar Stockton, has to come in, and he had a really gutsy performance in that game. He definitely felt like a run-first guy in that game, but really showed off his physicality, had the one awful interception, which kind of made you scratch your head a little bit there. And then he played in the game against Notre Dame. Obviously, Notre Dame won that game, kind of a low-scoring defensive game. Stockton didn't necessarily play great in that game. One thing, my biggest takeaway I remember from that game, no touch on his throws. Like, everything was just a missile all over the football field. Obviously, you can't play quarterback like that. But Kirby obviously loves his leadership, loves his toughness, and it seems like his teammates have a belief in him. But he was throwing it 30-plus times against an FCS opponent last week against Austin Peay. That makes me scratch my head a little bit. He threw it 34 times in that game. That's not Kirby smart. I've got issues with that. I'll be honest, I didn't watch the game, Georgia and Austin Peay, but him throwing it 34 times, that isn't a good idea, and I don't know why exactly that transpired on the football field for Georgia. So I'm really interested to see how he plays in this game. He has that big game experience, as we just alluded to, played in the SEC title game against Texas, played against Notre Dame, but obviously this is his first big test as the guy at Georgia, right? First two games, Marshall, Austin Peay don't really count, right? He's got to go on the road to Neyland Stadium, and as I said, I've been to Neyland Stadium. There aren't many environments in college football that are better and that are louder than Neyland Stadium, so that certainly is going to be a big issue for Georgia in this game. Now, I would give the Dogs the lean as far as the quarterback that is best equipped to handle this. Now, that might seem crazy saying he's on the road. What are you talking about? But Joey Aguilar also hasn't been in a spot where he's had to play in this big of a game. This is the most pressure that Aguilar will face. It's going to be sold out. Place is going to be rocking. The adrenaline's going to be through the roof for Aguilar, and all he's heard is people say how fantastic he is the past 2 weeks and how great Tennessee is as an offense. Whereas Georgia, on the other side of that, where people are saying, what's Georgia doing there? Barely beating Austin Peay, whatever the case may be. Kirby, I'm telling you, has coached those guys hard throughout the week, and they're going to show up and be ready to play. Also, an interesting storyline, the offensive line is healthier for Georgia. That perhaps, they were without one of their tackles in the Austin Peay game, and I believe one of their guards as well. Both of those guys are expected to play here in Tennessee, which could perhaps put them in a better spot. But it really feels like, a low-scoring game, right? Tennessee has never scored more than 17 points in the 4 games where Kirby and Heupel have played each other. So, Tennessee is known for scoring a bunch of points, having this prolific offense. Georgia clearly has had the solution for that. I think a lot of people think Tennessee is just kind of this air raid offense where they spread it out and chuck it around. That's not what Heupel likes to do whatsoever. They're very much a team that wants to establish the run, and then they're going to take some shots over the top as well. But the reason why they haven't had success against Georgia, one, you could argue Georgia has the better players, right? They have the better recruits, and they're better coached, in my opinion. So, that's obviously one thing. But, Tennessee's had issues running the football on Georgia, and then they've been in spots where Georgia's like, well, we're just going to keep it in front of us. And then Tennessee can't push the ball down the field. They can't make those explosive plays. And by that point, Georgia has already had a big lead in the ball game. And it's kind of felt like Tennessee was just kind of, besides last year where they jumped out to that lead, but in the years prior to that where it felt like they kind of were behind before it even really got going, and they were just really in a very difficult spot as it relates to their performance against Georgia. But that's going to be an incredible football game. Again, the line was 7.5. That's what it opened at, all the way down to 3.5 here at this point. We will pick that game later on the show here today. But, Kirby, he's going to have those guys locked in. They had a really intense week of practice. I definitely feel like he's going to have those guys playing with a chip on his shoulder, and we'll see if Josh Heupel and Tennessee are up for that test, and we're going to find out how exactly real Tennessee is, right? Or if this is just another team that can blow out the weak teams, but once they get into SEC play, kind of, they win a lot of games, but, they can't always beat the top dogs, right? We kind of saw that last year with Tennessee. They get into the playoff after the expansion, but no prayer against Ohio State. Georgia's certainly not nearly at the level that Ohio State team was last year as far as talent and just ability as an offense. But it's going to be really interesting because, Tennessee trying to get that monkey off their back. And it's not like this thing is in Athens in between the hedges. It's at Neyland Stadium, and that place is going to be absolutely rocking. Certainly looking forward to that matchup. All right, before we get into our picks, I do want to talk a little AFC North whip around here on today's show. So The Athletic, they do this weekly, right? Their beat writers get together, and there's some questions that The Athletic pose, and then all the guys that cover the teams in the AFC North kind of give their opinions on the question. Paul Dehner Jr. does a tremendous job covering the Cincinnati Bengals. Got a lot of love for all those beat reporters that covered the Bengals, but in my opinion, Dehner's at the top of that list. He does an incredible job. So obviously he was kind of talking about what he thought about Cincinnati as well as the other teams in the AFC North. One of the narratives that they discussed was Joe Burrow, right? I think in years past, maybe people hit the panic button when Joe Burrow and the Bengals offense performed the way they did in week one, but it seems like this year people have turned around a little bit and have been, have woken up a little bit to the fact that, hey, the Bengals are going to be just fine offensively, and that was something that Dehner wrote about, basically saying, I expect them to get back to what they're doing and what they have done in previous seasons here. For whatever reason in week one, they have their issues. A lot of times it's been Cleveland on the road. I get that. I get the challenge of that, but I'm expecting Joe Burrow to really respond this week, and he's going to be just fine, and it's going to be one of the best offenses, in my opinion, the best offense in the National Football League throughout the rest of the year. And it's not really a stinker by Joe Burrow. If you don't watch the game and you see that, he didn't have many passing yards, the Bengals only scored 17 points, you might think, it was a stinker from Joe Burrow. Wasn't really the case if you watch the game, right? Where there was like one or two throws that maybe he could have made, but for the most part, he did everything correctly. He didn't miss. He took what the defense gave him in the rare spots where they gave him anything. Had those two drives in the first half that were really impressive where he was able to work the offense down and score some points, and that certainly was something that he was able to execute on, and I think we're going to see this Bengals offense respond this week and throughout the remainder of the season. No reason to think that Joe Burrow and that Bengals offense is going to be doing that type of stuff on a weekly basis as far as what they did against Cleveland. Now, Pittsburgh and Baltimore, their defenses stunk in week one. I get it's 1 week, and lots of people want to overreact, what have you. Obviously, we'll do a little bit of that on our show as well, but it's a division that's predicated on defensive play, hard-nosed football. It's been like that throughout the entirety of my life. And if you're the Bengals and you see what Baltimore and Pittsburgh did defensively, you're probably like, well, okay, right? Obviously, you haven't had issues scoring against Baltimore's defense in recent years, but Pittsburgh at times has been able to slow you down, and they got up a lot of points to the New York Jets and Justin Fields. I'll be interested to see what kind of adjustments they make. Now, I don't think they're going to be that bad throughout the entirety of the season, and by they, I mean the Ravens and Steelers defense. But that's certainly something that's noteworthy and certainly something that needs to be monitored as we progress throughout the season. Pittsburgh's got Seattle at home this week, and Baltimore has Cleveland. So we'll learn a lot about these defenses based on those performances as well, but that's certainly something that was noteworthy. There's this narrative out there that the Ravens can't finish games, and maybe it's true. I mean, John Harbaugh, he has 7 losses since 2022 when leading by 10-plus points in the second half. That's not good, right? That's flat out not good. Tom Brady talked about this the other day, basically saying, Baltimore's in a spot where they're not executing to the best of their ability at the end of football games. Now, there's different, ways you can look at this, right? I think one way you could perhaps say is, well, Lamar Jackson early in the game, he's impossible to stop, right? Because you're getting this guy that can do all types of things. His legs are fresh, and he's really just in a spot where he's constantly making plays. Then as the game goes on, you have maybe a little bit of a better feel for how to operate when you're trying to defend Jackson. Maybe he's not at his fastest as a runner, and maybe that's why, they're easier to defend later in the game. Maybe. And also you also have to understand that Baltimore has tons of leads, right? So inevitably you're going to blow some. Now, the fact that they've blown 7 since 2022 up by 10 plus points, that's probably definitely too many. But also the takeaway can be Baltimore has a ton of leads, and that's just kind of the reality of the situation. But for the Ravens, they're a team that's going to be evaluated solely on their postseason success. That's just kind of where they're at as an organization. It's kind of how the Bengals were couple of years ago. Hopefully they can get back to that point. But what they do in the regular season, how many games they win, people are like, they're going to be in the playoffs, and they have Lamar Jackson, who's top 4 quarterback in the league. How are they going to play in the postseason? And that's definitely not a narrative they want around them as a football team. If they're in a spot where they're obviously, not closing out football games and giving up fourth quarter leads, and for a team that hasn't executed well in the playoffs, that certainly is a thing of concern as well. Also, they touched on Cam Taylor-Britt. We've talked about how the defense was great for Cincinnati in that game, but obviously Cam Taylor-Britt was not great in that football game for the Cincinnati Bengals. He was targeted 7 times. He gave up 6 catches, 76 yards. 4 of those catches turned into first downs, and also gave up a touchdown in that football game as well. People are going to continue to target Cam Taylor-Britt, and it's up to him to, play better football and understand that he's going to continue to keep getting targeted early and often unless he makes some changes. Also, he got benched twice last year. Teams know that. Teams recognize that, and that probably plays into the fact that some teams are picking on him as well. My confidence as it relates to Cam Taylor-Britt, I don't know. We talked about this previously on the show. His head's clearly in the right spots. He understands that he's got to be better. He's had the accountability. He's gone up to the coaches saying he needs to be better, but he's got to go out there and show it on the football field. Now, luckily for him, Bengals don't necessarily have a ton of options behind him. Maybe they'll be in a spot where, they go with Josh Newton over him and run it with Newton and Turner and Dax Hill. We'll see. But Cam Taylor-Britt certainly was the weak link of the Bengals defense in that Week 1 game against Cleveland. We'll see if they can adjust and be better off as time progresses. And then this last one that I mentioned is the offensive line for Pittsburgh. And let's be very clear here, it is a problem as far as their offensive line goes. I talked about earlier in the week how Aaron Rodgers makes Pittsburgh a threat, and I stand by that, and I believe that. 4 touchdowns in that game, incredible. But he's also 41 years old, and he also has limited mobility now inside and outside of the pocket. And that Steelers offensive lineman is bad, right? Gave up 4 sacks in that game against New York, a New York front that, isn't necessarily a world-beating type of defensive front, right? And, they gave up a lot of sacks in that football game. If Aaron Rodgers continues to take that much punishment, he's not going to make it throughout the entirety of the year. And even if he does, he's not going to be able to move whatsoever, and he's going to be a complete statue back there. So if Pittsburgh wants to become a team that can be taken seriously in the division and the conference, that offensive line has to improve. And this has been a huge issue for Mike Tomlin over the past several years. The offensive line consistently for Mike Tomlin has stunk, and I've kind of noticed that as a theme, really, for defensive head coaches. When you have an offensive head coach that gets hired and he comes in there, he usually addresses the offensive line immediately, and it usually gets better than where it was before he took over. Mike Tomlin's been trying to address this offensive line forever, and it is not good, and it hasn't been good. And they've allocated top-of-the-line resources to it. They got 2 first-round picks there at tackle and a second-rounder at their center position, and they still can't go out there and play competent football as an offensive line. That is something that probably will hold Pittsburgh back if it doesn't get corrected, and that's certainly another takeaway that I wanted to discuss as we went through our AFC North whip-around coverage. All right, we've made it. Last part of today's show. We want to get to our best bets of the week. We will see exactly how this segment changes as we progress throughout the football season. Maybe we're in a spot where we do this kind of segment at the end of every show for just a couple of minutes, but I have 6 picks. Will it always be 6? No. Could it be more? Yeah. Could it be less? Yeah. I feel pretty good about the 6 picks that I have. Lots of favorites. I will just say that right off the top, and that certainly could be a bit of a pause for concern for some people, but got 6 picks. We'll break them down here on today's show. We'll track them. We'll revisit them on Monday. If you want to ride, obviously do that in the comments section. If you want to pick me apart, if they don't hit, on Monday, certainly welcome to do that as well. But 4 college games, 2 professional games, and we will start with a noon game on Saturday, Clemson and Georgia Tech. Clemson is a team that a lot of people picked to be the winning team in the in the college football playoff, win the national title. I've been high on Clemson. I was expecting them to, really get back to that Clemson of old, right, that we saw with Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence with Sweeney at the helm. He's got really good players on defense. Lots of top 15 picks floated around that defense. And they've got a quarterback in Cade Klubnik, who a lot of people think is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. They're only favored by 2.5 points on the road against Georgia Tech. I am laying those 2.5 points for Clemson over Georgia Tech. I expect them to win and cover. It kind of feels like now or never, right? They didn't play a horrible game by any stretch of the imagination. That opener against LSU, I think you need to be rewarded for taking those kinds of games in a week 1 situation. Obviously, they were at home and fell a little bit short in that game to Garrett Nussmeier and the LSU Tigers, but I still view Clemson as a threat, but it's go time. They were down 16-0 to Troy last week, and that's going to allow Dabo Swinney to really coach them hard throughout the week, put them in a good spot. Georgia Tech has just been a feisty team, kind of an ACC sleeper this year, but Haynes King's banged up. When Haynes King is healthy, they certainly are a problem, but Haynes King has been banged up, and he's all reports are that he's going to play, but if he can't run it 20-plus times for Georgia Tech in this game, that's going to be an issue for them. It's an offense that's predicated on their quarterback, Haynes King, running the football. He's done a tremendous job of that in some big spots throughout his career. I don't think he is healthy enough to go out against a ferocious Clemson defense and win this game. I'm laying the 2.5 points. Give me Clemson at noon over Georgia Tech. All right, we previewed Georgia and Tennessee earlier today in the show, and I'm going to be laying the points with Georgia as well. On the road, -3.5. By the way, these lines, it's right when we start the show, that's the lines we're operating with. So maybe you don't get the same exact line if you wait till Saturday or Sunday to put it in, but that's how we're going to operate here, just the ESPN lines going into our Friday show. So Georgia -3.5. Kirby's owned Josh Heupel. The Dogs have owned the Volunteers. I look for that to continue. They just have better players. Defensively, Joey Aguilar, he's shown a lot through a couple of weeks as the quarterback of Tennessee, but this defense that he is facing is going to be a defense that he hasn't faced anything like this. They're going to fly around. They're going to make a ton of plays. They're going to be locked in, ready to go. They hear the noise, right? Obviously, they're favorites in this game, but I think Kirby's going to have them playing like they're underdogs and playing with that chip on their shoulder. And I think they go out there and win this game. It's going to be a low-scoring game, and Georgia's not going to blow them out. I don't think that's going to be the case either. But I look for them to win kind of a 21-17 type of game. Maybe a 20-14 type of game, something along those lines. I do think it will be very, very low-scoring, kind of a possession game, field position game there as well. But I think Georgia edges Tennessee and just barely covers in this game. I feel a lot better without the hook if it's just -3, but I will take -3.5. Give me Kirby Smart and the Dogs on the road. So 2 road favorites there to start, which is always a little bit dangerous. And we got another college football play here later in the evening. LSU is at home, and we would have spent time talking about this game had Florida not lost to South Florida. I think going into the year, people viewed this as a great game at the beginning of the year, but certainly lost a lot of its luster considering that Florida lost to South Florida. LSU right now is favored by 7.5 points. They were my pick going into the season to win the national title. Do I feel great about that right now? Maybe not, but I think they have probably the best quarterback in the country in Garrett Nussmeier. They've got a really, really good defense. Brian Kelly hit the transfer portal, and he hit it hard. They've got a new offensive line, so you always have question marks about that. Really the first time, I guess the second time after they played Clemson, but and they did a great job answering the bell as an offensive line in that game. We'll see how they do against Florida. They've got transfers. Delane, the safety from Virginia Tech, he's an unbelievable football player. Whit Weeks, linebacker, he flies around. He makes a ton of plays. Harold Perkins there as well, coming off the injury. He's got a lot of versatility. So Clemson, LSU, they have a lot of experience. I just think they're the better team. Death Valley is going to be rocking on Saturday night. That's going to be a tough spot for Florida. And a reason why I think it's going to be such a tough spot is, DJ Lagway, who was viewed as one of the best quarterbacks in the country going into this year. South Florida didn't even really put much pressure on him, and they still weren't able to move the football. That is a concern if I'm the Florida Gators. Billy Napier, I've said it for a long time. I don't believe he is the answer at Florida. I do not believe he's the guy. I believe he's going to struggle, and I like LSU by double digits in this game at home. 3 favorites. Let's make it 4. Notre Dame at home against Texas A&M. I am laying the 6.5 points with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish in this game. Notre Dame obviously lost to Miami, who, by the way, is a good team. They've got a really good, they're really good in the trenches, and Carson Beck, say what you want about him, but he played pretty good against Notre Dame in week 1. I've got a lot of belief in CJ Carr. I was impressed with how he handled that game, but I don't think the coaching staff necessarily put him in the best spot to be successful in that game for Notre Dame. Jeremiah Love, my opinion, is the 3rd best player in college football after Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith, and they didn't give him the ball enough. So I think, he needs to be way more in their game plan. He needs to get more touches, maybe not try to hurdle everybody when he has the football. But Notre Dame, after that loss, if they lose this game against A&M and they're 0-2, they might be in a spot where they can't make the playoff, because you look at their schedule and there's not a ton of teams that they can go out there and really say, well, that's a big win for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. They're not really in that kind of position, so I definitely think they're going to win, and I also feel comfortable laying the points, minus 6.5. Marcel Reed, we know what he can do running the football. He's going to have to throw the football for Texas A&M to win this game. I have some question marks with that. I like Mike Elko a lot. I think he's done a lot of good things for the program, but I'm going to lay the points with Notre Dame minus 6.5. So 4 favorites so far. Let's make it 5. We've got the Buffalo Bills on the road against the New York Jets, covering minus 6.5. The Bills, through parts of that game against Baltimore, they weren't playing good football, but obviously they won the game because Josh Allen put the cape on. And when you win imperfectly, Sean Payton always says this, that gives you an opportunity to coach hard throughout the next week. And that's exactly what happened with Buffalo. Yeah, they got the win, but they did a lot of things, especially defensively, that were not good in that football game. I'm expecting their defense to rebound and bounce back. They're obviously playing a much lesser offense in the New York Jets, who had a lot of success against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I'm not expecting the Jets offense to do much throughout this season. I think that was kind of a one-off as far as their performance there. Justin Fields is going to have to throw the football if they're going to win this game, and I don't think he's going to be able to do that well enough to win. Maybe they keep it tight throughout the first couple of quarters, but I think Buffalo pulls away at the end, covers minus 6.5. And the last play this week is our first underdog, so the 6 picks, 5 favorites, 1 underdog. Got the Seattle Seahawks. They're going on the road. Give me Seattle plus 3.5 against Pittsburgh. Again, that offensive line, we just spent time talking about it, for Pittsburgh is bad. And they got a 41-year-old quarterback that can move a little bit, but certainly can't move the way in which he used to at one point. Seattle, that defense is ferocious. They're hyper-aggressive. They fly around. They make plays. They're good in the trenches. They're good in the back end as well for Mike McDonald, year 2 as their head coach. And Sam Darnold, against that 49ers team, they didn't really score many points, but he looked all right in that game. He was able to move the ball. Darnold, of course, was fantastic last year for Minnesota. Pittsburgh defense, shaky against the Jets, right? I think Darnold's going to be able to score some points. And are they going to win the game? I'm not exactly sure, but 3.5, I definitely will take that. Give me Seattle plus 3.5. So to recap real quick, Clemson minus 2.5 on the road against Georgia Tech. Georgia minus 3.5 on the road against Tennessee. LSU minus 7.5 at home against Florida. Notre Dame minus 6.5 at home against Texas A&M. Bills minus 6.5 on the road. And East Rutherford against the New York Jets. And Seattle plus 3.5 on the road against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So we'll see how that transpired, but that is our first edition of my best bets of the weekend. Appreciate everyone that hung out throughout the entirety of today's show. Certainly means a lot, and 1 week in the books here at the Stone Shield Show. That certainly is very exciting. We will be back next week, hopefully talking about a Cincinnati Bengals victory. We'll see exactly if they're able to do that against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Off the bench also will return next week. Against Monday through Friday. Trace Fowler and Reed Mouse will be back for that, so looking forward to that. Appreciate everyone that hung out this weekend. Again, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and we will catch you next week. Have a great weekend, everybody.